think I've clicked all the right buttons.
It says we're now live on YouTube, it says.
Fantastic. I said to Adam, you don't need to come tonight. Don't be silly. And then realised I wasn't 100% sure what I was doing. Good evening, everyone. Shana Tova. It is lovely to be with you all. We are looking at how to or whether to fast this year. This year when we are going to be doing Yom Kippur from our own homes. And so we are going to start off by just going around saying how we are, first of all, and then also saying whether you perceive there being a particular challenge facing you this year. So Yom Kippur brings many challenges, but are there any challenges in particular that you are feeling anxious about as you go into Yom Kippur? And if so, what are they? And it doesn't have to be fasting related. So I am okay. I'm Hannah. I'm okay. It's that very strange period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur where I think we, as rabbis are and cantors, are slightly frazzled. And I am anxious about the energy it's going to take for us to sustain ourselves through this year when we don't have adrenaline coming in from the people that are normally in the building. So that's where I'm at. So let's go around. Robert, how are you, and do you have any particular anxieties this year?
Good afternoon, everybody. Shana Tova. I'm Robert. I'm wonderful. I have no anxieties. I live in utopia.
Don't we all wish we could be Robert?
I mean, it is without question the most revolting period of life I have lived through. We had the news today of the further restrictions on weddings, which affects us because we had got Jenny's wedding organised for the 15th of November. We had told 160 people they weren't coming and 30 were, and now we've got another problem. So yeah, I'm fine. It's lovely to see you all.
Yeah, it's real. It's lovely to see you too. David and Naomi, how are you, and do you have any particular anxieties going into this Yom Kippur? I've just asked you to unmute.
Hi, Rabbi Hannah, Shana Tova. For me, I think the challenge is cycling myself from the norm for me, from the background that I come from, and what I'm used to year in, year out, into a completely, I mean, that's already happened for Rosh Hashanah for me, but now getting into a completely different mode of, and usually as I've suddenly got Ellen here.
That's very true.
And I also normally sing in the choir, which makes the day go quickly, actually, because I'm so absorbed. So it's going to be, that's going to be challenging. That is going to be, in a way though, it's strange because I'm quite looking forward to it being so different as well.
Thank you, Naomi. Philip, how are you? And are you feeling any particular challenges this year?
No, I'm fine, thank you. Shana Tova to you all. I thought, I think I'm energized because I thought the Rosh Hashanah services were wonderful on Zoom. I came away feeling very good after the weekend. I think it's going to be a challenge, and that's why I've come to this meeting, to hear what the perceptions are and get some real live tips for how to proceed with Yom Kippur and fasting at home. Thank you.
Val, how are you?
Hi, I'm Val. I'm absolutely fine. I feel that it's, we're living in such a surreal world at the moment that everything's different. So Yom Kippur is going to be a unique experience. I'm feeling absolutely fine and sort of looking forward to it in a way that it's that it is going to be so different. And I'm not going to be thinking of all the people that I'm going to feed at the end of the fast. So I can actually concentrate on the day in a different way.
Thank you, Val. Jill and John, how are you both? You've got to unmute.
Very good, thank you. Yeah, a bit worried about my ability to cope with the concentration that's going to be required in a home situation over Yom Kippur. Mm-hmm. Just watching the world go by outside the window is going to be a distraction.
We'll turn it round.
We can turn it round. No, but I think the as Robert said, what happened over, I think it was Robert, what happened over Rosh Hashanah was so wonderful that the pointers are, the auguries are good.
Indeed. Yes, it's the annual family traditions that I'll miss, of feeding children and little children and then sending them away, and maybe walking up to, as we do, walk up to the manor house, and then actually being in that environment all day, rather than being at home all day when there are so many. We're going to have to be very disciplined, I think. And I hope the service will be as good as the Rosh Hashanah one, so that we won't actually have to make an enormous effort, because it'll just flow. We could do with a shofar in the house.
Ellen, it's lovely to see you. I haven't seen you for 6 months. How are you, and what are your anxieties coming into Yom Kippur?
It's not anxieties, it's just that the Rosh Hashanah was handled so well. I'm looking forward to the enormous creative effort that goes in, and all I have to do is sit at home with my computer. And I'm delighted that I have the camera working on the computer now, so you can see me. I'm not just a name on a blank square.
Lovely for us too, Ellen. Thank you. Pam, how are you, and what challenges do you perceive, anxieties do you have going into the day?
Thank you. I'm fine. Nice to see you, Hannah. Well done for everything you've been doing over the Chagim. It's been amazing. I think Yom Kippur for me is the day that I go into shul at 10:30 in the morning and come out after the shofar blast at 7:30 in the evening, and I stay in my seat. I might walk around the Sternberg Center for 10 minutes just to stretch my legs and get a bit of air. But basically, I'm there, I'm following the service, I'm listening to the choir. And it's going to be a challenge just to sit in my office and look at a screen. I can see from the program that came through today that there's going to be a break in the afternoon, and I think I may well pick up my computer and walk over to my daughter, they live nearby, and carry on there, just because I think it's just going to be too much to stare at the screen all day on my own on that day. And the service, so I may just do that, and then we'll break the fast together, and it'll be different, but it'll be fine, I'm sure. I think I'll miss the choir desperately, but thanks for everything. It's going to be good. I know it'll be fine.
We're going to miss the choir too, especially on Yom Kippur. Simone, I'm not sure if you're with us, but if you are, how are you? And
Okay,
what challenges?
I am with you. I am with you. I'm just eating. I feel just really, really busy as usual with a million things to do. How am I feeling about Yom Kippur? For the first time, I'm going to be on my own and I'm going to have to break the fast on my own, which is not really what I really want to do. It was always been, I fast to be part of my family, my local community. That's why I do it when I'm on holiday. I don't fast, but I do if I know I'm breaking, with other people. I did say if no one's going to synagogue other than myself, they should all come to me, because then they don't have to. They don't do the synagogue, and they can enjoy breaking the fast with me and then go back home afterwards. And I was just a little bit disappointed that nobody really wanted to make the effort, even though I always make the effort, go down to Boreham Wood and Harperton to break the fast with my family. And I thought this year, it could be my chance to invite everybody over, because no one's going to synagogue other than me. And then everybody could break the fast with me and then go home. So I'm just feeling a little bit disappointed in the uptake and just how I'm feeling about the lack of whatever, I make the effort to go to them, and it'd be nice on this one occasion if no one's going to the synagogue, but everybody comes to the effort. And I said, it doesn't matter if anybody fasts or not. Some people do in our family, some don't because they've got diabetes and other illnesses. That's always been the case in our family, and nobody looks at anybody. We just so I'm just feeling.
Thank you, Simone.
Sad about it all.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm just going to move us on because we are limited in time tonight. And before I ask Rabbi Elliot the question I've asked all of you, because Rabbi Elliot's also joining us, I'm just going to give you a word of warning that we want to finish tonight at 7:55 to allow us all to go and get to the Prime Minister's briefing on time. Obviously, for us, it has great implications for the next week of our lives. So I'm going to ask Rabbi Elliot the same question, and then we are going to move you quickly along. So Rabbi Elliot, how are you? And what are you anxious about? What challenges do you foresee yourself having in the next week? Paul?
Okay, I'm similar to what you said. As someone who's planning services and shirim and all the things that we're doing, it's quite a frazzled time. The thing that I'm most anxious about, I think, is that when in the past on Yom Kippur, when you're getting to that time in the afternoon, late afternoon, the thing that really sustains you, particularly I think when you're leading services, is the electricity in the room, that there are so many other people that are there with you that are kind of going through the same. Everyone's just as tired as you are. Everyone's just as kind of in that space, and you kind of feel that because of that physical closeness, and we're just not going to have that this year. And the thing I'm worried about is that I won't be sustained through the work that I'm doing by the people being there. So that's kind of my anxiety. The thing that I think I'm going to struggle with probably a little bit.
So we are going to dive into some tech study, because the question of this evening is how to or whether to fast on this Yom Kippur. Obviously, there is a big challenge, a challenge unique to this year, which is that most of us are doing services from the same building as our fridges, and that is real. And actually, many of us are doing it from the same room as our fridge. And so how are we going to hold that tension? So we're going to go into some tech study to look at it and see what's going on. And the first thing, and I don't really need to say this in this group of people because I feel like I know you all very well, but this is not a space to cast judgment on anyone else's fasting practices or to pressurize people into fasting or not to fasting. It's a place so that we can gain some knowledge so that we can make any choices that we make from an educated point of view, which is what I know we at Elith love to do. So in order to do that, let's say the blessing for study together so we can dive into some of that text study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
So I thought we would begin by looking at Leviticus chapter 23, verse 27. If everyone's got the handouts on the website, it's there on the website. I've printed mine off, but if you're able to see it on the screen as well, that's great. Which is where this whole idea of fasting really goes back to. So I'm going to read it. I'll read this first one, then maybe I'll ask some people to volunteer for later text to read, or I'll volunteer people directly. So it says in Leviticus chapter 23, mark the 10th day of this seventh month being Tishri, is a day of atonement, a sacred occasion for you. And you shall afflict your souls or yourselves, we'll come back to that in a second, and you shall make a fire offering to the Eternal. So this is where the idea of fasting comes from. But what does it mean to afflict our souls or ourselves? This word nafshotechem comes from the word nefesh, and nefesh has a very multifarious history of meanings. So we might translate it as our soul, we afflict our soul. We might translate it as we afflict ourselves, because nefesh can be a self. But it can also mean literally the gullet, like the windpipe, or the and there's therefore to do with breath. So the idea of nefesh is very slippery. We don't necessarily know. There's no one meaning. And I wonder what people think when you hear this phrase of initem et nafshotechem, you shall afflict your soul. What does that raise for you?
Presumably, it's asking us to suffer in some way. It doesn't say enormously, some small way, so that we feel this Day of Atonement in an alternative fashion.
Right, so it makes the day feel different in some way, and we kind of, make ourselves feel worse in some way, or make ourselves feel an impact on us.
I've always experienced this verse to be very visceral. It's not about afflicting your soul. To me, feels like a physical, emotional thing that I meant to feel all over. So that Yom Kippur is meant to be a thing of body and emotion and mind all together, that my entire being needs to be afflicted in that way, and uncomfortable. That's what it's always made me think of when I read that verse.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on what it means to afflict oneself? Because another potential meaning that I often associate with it is this idea of punishment. So we're somehow punishing ourselves. And it not necessarily that's how we should think about it, but I think that there's one potential interpretation, which is that in some way we're acknowledging that we've sinned and we're somehow punishing ourselves. That's definitely one way of thinking of fasting, that you are somehow kind of enacting this punishment on yourself, so that maybe someone else isn't going to punish you for it. So that's the biblical basis. And let's move on to the Mishnah, and there are some selections from the 8th chapter of Mishnah Yoma. Now, Yoma in Aramaic simply means the day, but it refers to the day of Yom Kippur, and the whole of that Mishnah is about the day of Yom Kippur and what all the regulations around Yom Kippur are. And it's not actually until you get to chapter 8 of the tractate that it talks about fasting. And it talks about what you can and can't do on Yom Kippur, what you're supposed to be, what it might mean to afflict your soul. Robert, because you're in the top left of my screen, maybe you'd like to read paragraph 1 of Mishnah Yoma for us.
Pleasure, thank you. On Yom Kippur, it is forbidden to eat, drink, wash, anoint, put on sandals, or have sexual intercourse. The king or a bride may wash their face, and a woman after childbirth may put on sandals. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer, but the sages forbade them.
Thank you very much. So here we begin to understand what the rabbis interpreted as meaning you should afflict yourselves. You shouldn't eat, drink, anoint, anoint, meaning put kind of oils on yourself, or kind of maybe make yourself up in some way, and put on sandals. And of course, we interpret that as not wearing leather. So many people won't wear leather shoes, for example, or leather belt on Yom Kippur, or have sexual intercourse.
Elliot, sorry, do we know why or at what point the rabbis made the assumption that afflict equals fasting?
No, I don't know. But what we know, obviously, is that the Mishnah is written down in around 220 CE, 200, 220. But it's a combination of sayings that have been passed down for generations and generations and generations. So it probably happened, sometime between, 200 BCE and 200 CE, something like that. It's really not, we don't know. It's very difficult to know, especially because this one isn't attributed to anybody.
The thing that we do know is that it's definitely not biblical. Right, like it's definitely not a biblical thing that fasting is something we are told to do. So it's a much later addition in those terms.
Yeah. And then we get these three exceptions: the king, the bride, and the woman after childbirth. Any thoughts about why those three, or why those three things? Why Rabbi Eliezer, at any rate, might have said that those three are exceptions?
So when we were looking at this Mishnah earlier, I needed Rabbi Elliot to clarify the bride for me, because quite clearly you cannot get married on Yom Kippur. So what does it mean by a bride? And Rabbi Elliot told me that you are a bride for 30 days after your wedding day. So the bride is anyone in that 30-day period. That was right?
Yeah. According to I think it's a medieval commentator called the Bartanura, who's written a commentary of the whole Mishnah, says that the reason it says a bride is because if you got married the day before Rosh Hashanah, then you'd still be a bride, according to Jewish tradition.
So I felt I missed a trick. So tell Jenny that she'll be a bride for a month. Okay?
I was going to ask a different question, which is, was Rabbi Eliezer a bit of a rebel, and why did the sages disagree with him?
So the Mishnah is full of these kind of statements that there's a kind of minority and a majority opinion. And what's great about it is that it keeps them both there. So it doesn't just say, oh, well, the decision was that it was this, and therefore we just say this. It says Rabbi X thought one thing, Rabbi Y thought something else, and it keeps both of them there. When it says the sages said, generally that means that that's what the halakha was. So it gives us a hint about what actually later on what would be considered to be the law. Firstly, because the sages more against one wins over, but also because it came last, it's considered to be the more important opinion, if that makes sense. But yes, Rabbi Eliezer is also a bit of a rebel, and is generally many disagree with him on a number of different occasions. But he was also very mystical. He was considered to be very and there's lots of magic associated with it as well. That's for a whole different shiur. We could talk for hours about Rabbi Eliezer and his rebelliousness.
It also, sorry to interrupt again, it also seems to me pretty bizarre that after a woman who has been through the endurance of childbirth can wear shoes but not wash her face.
Right. Yeah, although I think the reason these are, for me, the reason these are picked out are for very specific reasons. A woman after childbirth, she might want to wash her face, but she doesn't need to, whereas she probably does need to wear sandals because it's probably for health reasons, perhaps. A king and a bride. Well, a king possibly because they have to be seen to be majestic. They have to be seen in public. And a bride, again, according to the Bartanura, it's because a bride has to be alluring to her husband. So that's maybe something which an idea we also want to kind of get away from. I know Rabbi Hannah made a face at my suggestion that we didn't need to wash their face.
No, my face was more at the suggestion that for medical reasons they would need to wear sandals, not eat. Surely,
that's true.
I mean,
Yeah.
I have to say, clearly, as a woman who has not given birth, I don't know, but I cannot imagine that the first thing you think after giving birth is, I need sandals on, rather than actually maybe I need to eat something because I've just gone through hours of labour. So that was the thing that I made the face at. The thing that kind of makes me laugh about this is the kind of categories and what they are able to do, and yet not that they're allowed to eat or drink, which is the thing that we would see as being the leniency in this.
Although maybe you thought that someone who's just given birth would be in the same category we're going to come to later, as someone who's ill, and they would just automatically be able to. It wouldn't be a question whether they could eat or drink.
Right.
Maybe, but you might think, oh, well, can they wear sandals? That could be a kind of, you weren't sure about it. So Rabbi Eliezer says, but bear in mind that the sages forbade it. So that the halacha is that none of these, even the king shouldn't wash their face as well. And that the woman who's just given birth shouldn't wear sandals, according to the majority of the sages. Let's move on to the next one so that we can get through as many of these texts as we can. Next on my screen is Naomi. Naomi, would you mind reading number 3 for us? Oh, you haven't got it. Okay, in that case, but you're also muted, so we can't hear what you're saying. I'm assuming that because we didn't hear what you said, Naomi, because you're muted. But I'm assuming you're saying that you don't have the.
I'm sorry, I haven't. We couldn't find the text. I'm sorry,
no.
we haven't got the
Okay.
text. I'm really sorry. Apology.
No problem. Philip, do you have it? Because you're next on my screen. Okay. Val? Does everyone? Okay. What I can
I'm
do
afraid
also,
I don't have it.
I'm gonna put the link in the. Oh, we haven't got chat.
Jill and John have it, and Pam has it, from what I can tell. So let's hand over to Jill and John.
Okay.
Can you read number 3 for us?
I don't have it because I'm just sitting here having dinner and it's just switched on.
Well,
Okay,
hopefully you're just enjoying it without them in front of
That's
you.
fine. I'm just listening. Yeah.
If someone ate or drank in a state of unawareness, they're obliged to bring just one sin offering. If they ate or did work, they're obligated to bring 2 sin offerings. If they ate foods that are not suitable for eating or drank liquids unfit for drinking, or if they drank fish brine or fish pickling liquid, they are exempt.
Thank you very much. So it seems very odd to us that they would specify these particular things that you can eat, you can drink fish brine or fish pickling liquid. Does anyone have any thoughts about why those might be included, those particular things?
Is this consideration for others in terms of the smell?
It could be, but it's saying it doesn't matter if you drink fish. What it's saying is if you drink fish brine, it's not counted as drinking. So actually, it's saying if you want to, go ahead. It's not against the rules of Yom Kippur.
Could it be because they would be seen as a form of punishment if you ate or drank?
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, it's not. They're not nice things. They're not nourishing you, right? They're not making you feel. They're not making you feel good. They're not giving you kind of sustenance in any way. In fact, in some ways, they're probably going to make you feel more thirsty and more hungry, because especially with the fish brine, things that are salty are going to make you feel very thirsty, and make you want to eat more as well. And I think that's what this. So the first bit of this Mishnah is obviously saying, if you drink or eat or do work by accident, like maybe if you forget, or you maybe fall asleep or something on Yom Kippur afternoon and wake up and think and then you drink or something like that, then you're not kind of committing a mortal sin, but you have to bring an offering. This is when the temple was still around. But if you eat things that aren't really food, then it's okay. Then it's not the same as eating or drinking. And I think this is one of the reasons that that some people would say it's okay to have to take medicine on Yom Kippur, for example. It is okay to take medicine on Yom Kippur, but why some halachic authorities would say it's okay to take medicine on Yom Kippur because it's not food. It's not sustaining you in the same way that food is.
Pam had a question and Philip had a question. So Pam first.
It's just we're not. If you're afflicting yourself, you're not supposed to be allowing yourself to have any pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what it means, that you shouldn't be getting pleasure from the food or the drink. And if it's something horrible or medicine, that's okay. But having something that might be enjoyable is out, but having something horrible is okay.
Yeah.
Philip?
Does that mean that the kids that don't like broccoli are allowed to eat broccoli?
Taking medicine, I have to take warfarin, for example, every night. So if I'm taking tablets, I normally have it with water. So the point is, you have to have some water, but obviously not an excessive amount.
Yeah, I think so. I think those the halachis, people that kind of are very careful about this kind of stuff and really observe this, would say that you have to have as small amount of water as you can in order to get the pill down.
Yeah.
And but as I said, I think both Rabbi Hannah and I would say, if you need to eat on Yom Kippur, you need to eat, or you need to drink, whatever. Let's move on, because again,
Simone also had the question.
Oh, sorry, Simone, go for it.
Yeah. The other thing is, hasn't it always been halacha that always saving life is always a priority over not breaking Shabbat, Yom Kippur, and everything else? And as medication can be about maintaining and saving life, if you don't take your medication, then you put your life at risk. If you've got diabetes, you end up being a diabetic coma, and therefore, actually, that's the reason why you do it, because we've always understood saving a life is the most important thing to be doing, even if you break something, a rule, okay.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're going to get to that a bit later on down the page. But absolutely, yes. It's always been the case that if fasting on Yom Kippur puts your life in danger, then you shouldn't. Then you should eat. And we're going to look at a number of different texts that say that in different ways throughout this session. Rabbi Hannah.
So I want to say I also took a slightly different interpretation from this. When it says if they ate foods that are not suitable for eating or drank liquids unfit for drinking, another way you could it's a looser translation, but something you could translate from it is that if you eat foods that are not of a nutritionally high quality, so not foods that don't sustain you in the same way, or drink liquids that don't quench your thirst in the same way, then actually it's okay. And that would help us think about the diet we adopt on Yom Kippur. So, it's if you eat, what are you eating? Are you eating, your standard lunch of a piece of salmon and a salad, or are you eating actually a cracker that will keep you going, but actually, is not great for eating and has a very low nutritional content? So it's just also thinking about it with that eye of modernity. What could it mean for us today? And drinking pickling liquid would be not so pleasant, but it would quench your thirst in a way, but it's not something you would just kind of go out and, I'm just going to drink some pickle juice now. Carry on, Elliot.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good point. Thank you. And finally, on this page, number 5, who has the source? Who hasn't spoken? Pam, great. Would you mind reading number 5 for us?
Can you hear me? If a pregnant woman smells food on Yom Kippur, we feed her until she feels restored. If someone is ill, we feed them according to doctors. If there are no doctors, we feed them according to themselves until they say enough.
Thank you. So this gets to the point I think that Simone was making, and I mentioned at the beginning, this idea that if people are ill, then they should eat. And what we found really interesting when Rabbi Hannah and I were talking about this earlier, we found it was very interesting that if there are doctors there, then doctors should recommend how much they should eat. And if they're not, then they get to decide. Like, you don't have to, we shouldn't be questioning people. If they say, I have to eat on Yom Kippur, then it's not up to us to say, oh, well, how much should you eat? Or are you sure you should be eating that? It's actually for people to define for themselves if they need to eat on Yom Kippur, what they should be eating. And of course, then we also have this reference to the pregnant woman. The Gemara, the commentary on the Mishnah goes further than this. It says even if she smelled meat that was non-kosher meat on Yom Kippur, then you would feed it to her. And then it kind of says what you should try. First of all, you should try let her suck up some of the juice through a straw. And if she's not satisfied with the juice, then you feed her the meat and like the choicest fats, etc. So it tries to minimize how much she's eating the non-kosher meat. But ultimately, if someone's pregnant, they need to eat. Then they need to eat whatever it is that they smell that they want to eat. Robert, you had your hand up. Oh, no, you got to go. Lovely to see you. Shnatova. Any thoughts on that one before we move on quickly to the next one? Okay. Great. So number 6, which is on page 2 of the Hebrew is on page 1, but the English is on page 2. If one is seized by a ravenous hunger, and this is the word here in Hebrew is bulmus, they may be given to eat even unclean things. So similar to the pregnant woman we just encountered, until their eyes are enlightened. If one is bitten by a rabid dog, do not feed him from the lobe of his liver. But Rabbi Mattia ben Harash permits it. And furthermore, it is the opinion of Rabbi Mattia ben Harash that if one has a pain in his throat, he may put medicine in him, even on Shabbat, because there is a doubt for his life, and any doubt for a life overrides Shabbat.
So I've studied this text possibly with a couple of you before, and the idea of bulmos.
Yes.
Yeah, because this is what I wrote my thesis on, was in fact on bulmos. And something that I want to draw your attention to is the connection between the ravenous hunger and the eyes. So there is this idea that if you are seized by a ravenous hunger, then your eyes go dim, and it's only when you're given something to eat, and they start off again in the Gemara, they feed them with honey and dates and sweet things first, but they're allowed even to eat unclean things, and they go into full detail of what they're allowed to eat, and it's until the eyes shine brighter again. And for any of us that know someone who is diabetic, as we've already mentioned, a real tell of how they're feeling can come from the eyes. And so this was very much thought to be possibly something to do with perhaps a diabetes of some sort, even though it was obviously not diagnosed or called that in those days. But also actually for any of us, often vision is one of the things that becomes distorted when you are overly hungry. And I know, speaking from myself as a migraine sufferer, the first thing that goes, if my blood sugar gets too low, the first thing that happens is I get aura, so I can't see properly out of my eyes. And this piece is very fascinating in that way. But also the eyes are connected very much to the soul in rabbinic literature. So the eyes are seen as the gateway to the soul. And so I have used this piece before, and this is very much my modern interpretation on it, but to talk about the psychological things that go along with not being able to eat, or with fasting. So if you are perhaps someone who has suffered from an eating disorder, and you then are forced to fast on Yom Kippur because that's what Jewish tradition teaches us, that actually that connection with the soul and the affliction that you could be causing yourself, and the danger that you're putting on yourself by triggering something in you, is very much connected in this way to kind of to eating. And so I've spoken before with some of you about bull moth being maybe a ravenous hunger, a physical ravenous hunger, or an emotional or psychological ravenous hunger, like a compulsion or a need to eat. And that can be just as powerful. So, you know, when we're sitting in our houses and our fridges are right there, that we might not feel hungry, we might not need to eat, but the idea that our fridge is just there and, oh, I could just eat that will overtake us just as much as a physical hunger, and will be just as distracting from our prayer and our ability to sit and concentrate in services as physical hunger. And so that's what I feel this text is bringing for us in this light, is that we shouldn't afflict our souls to the detriment of being able to concentrate. So that's just one interpretation. Elliot, I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add for this text.
Well, just to kind of follow on from what you were saying, I think there's this kind of fine line between what some people will find spiritually uplifting in doing the fast. For many people will find it kind of a spiritual practice which they value and which does a lot for them positively. And then there are those for whom emotionally it just is not something which is sustainable for them, or it's not something that's going to be very helpful for them. In fact, it could be negative. So there's that kind of, and there's a very thin line between when it kind of goes from one to the other. But it's that's worth bearing in mind, I think.
So we're going to move straight on to the story that we find in Talmud with this bull moth. And again, I'm going to bring a very modern interpretation, a very modern lens to it. So feel free to disagree with me. So the story goes that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi were walking on the way, and bull moth, this ravenous hunger that they speak about, although also sharing its root with the modern word for bulimia. So they were walking on the way, and bull moth seized Rabbi Yehuda, and he forced a shepherd to feed him bread. Rabbi Yossi said to him, "You forced that shepherd." When they reached the city, bull moth seized Rabbi Yossi, the other rabbi that was with him. Those surrounding him gave him cups of drink and plates of food. Rabbi Yehuda said to him, "I may have forced that shepherd, but you forced the entire city." So there's so many layers to this story. There's a couple of things that I want to draw your attention to, but I'd love to hear what you think about it. So the first thing that really always gets me every time I read this is that kind of competitive element between the two rabbis. You know, I may have forced that shepherd to give me bread, but you did that. You forced an entire city. And that's a judgment element that I feel that the rabbis are bringing in. They're being judgmental of one another, kind of comparing their afflictions, and mine was worse than yours, and I broke because this is obviously happening on Yom Kippur. I broke the fast in a small way just with bread, but you had to, have an entire city's worth of food. So that's the first thing, is that judgment-free zone on Yom Kippur. If you're sitting in your house and one of your family members or you need to go and break the fast, judgment-free zone. Don't be Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda in this situation. But the other thing that I want to draw your attention to is the idea that our own hunger impacts on other people. So when Rabbi Yossi is hungry, he has to be fed by a shepherd, and it distracts the shepherd from his own routine and what he's doing. We don't know if he's a Jewish shepherd that's trying to keep Yom Kippur that has to then go and get bread for Rabbi Yossi. We don't know, but essentially his actions impact on the shepherd. And then when that was Rabbi Yehuda. Then when Rabbi Yossi is hungry, his hunger impacts on an entire city. Now, Elliot can vouch, sharing an office with me, that I am notoriously a hangry person, an angry, hungry person. And I know that when I am hungry, it impacts on those around me in a negative fashion. So if you are sitting trying to concentrate on a service and you are in a couple or in a family or you are with other people, then we have to think about how our actions impact on someone else. So if we're sitting there feeling distracted or hangry or have a headache because we've been fasting, even more so this year when we're in very isolated units, our actions and the way we're feeling are going to impact on those around us. And therefore, there is even more reason for you to say, it is having a negative impact for me to be hungry at this time. And I think it makes us think about when we need to break the fast, not just for the good of ourselves, but for the good of those around us, in order that they can have a fulfilling Yom Kippur as well, so that we don't force a shepherd or force an entire city to help us break the fast, that we can just kind of go and do it by ourselves and not impact on others. I'm wondering if anyone has any other interpretations or any thoughts on that at this point. You're very quiet this evening. It's late and you're tired and you've already done all of Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so I'm going to hand back over to Elliot to take us on to our next kind of point for you. Oh, Elliot, you're still muted.
Sorry, thank you. I am not going to dwell on this next bit for too long because we've got a huge amount of time left, and I wanted to get on to the last bit, which is, I think, in some ways the most interesting bit. But in at the bottom of page 2 of the handout, there's a quotation from the book of Leviticus, which says, "You shall observe my statutes and my laws." This is part of the right in the middle of the book of Leviticus, where it's full of commandments, like one after the other. It says, "You shall observe my statutes and laws, which people do and live by them. I am the Eternal." This is then used later on to refer to what Simone drew our attention to about this idea of pekuach nefesh, the idea that you should do anything to save a life, including working on Shabbat, and that's often like the primary example. This is also taken from Yoma in the Babylonian Talmud. Again, the tractate is about Yom Kippur, and it says that you shall live by them. And the implication from "you shall live by them" is you shouldn't die by them. So if following the laws of Torah leads to something that's negative for your health, then you shouldn't do it, because you should live by them and not die by them. And we could understand this being very much about just literally physical living or dying. So in the sense that, well, if it's not going to kill you to fast on Yom Kippur, then you should fast. But we could also understand death in a broader sense. So, for example, if you were a doctor who observed halakha, you could go to work on Shabbat because you're going to save lives. But you're not. When you get there, you're not going to say, "Oh, I can treat that person because they're having a heart attack, but not that person because they broke their leg." Breaking your leg can be just as serious if you leave it unchecked than someone who's having a heart attack. So what I suppose I'm saying is that this idea that you should live by them and not die by them can be extended to if you have any kind of reason to eat on Yom Kippur to keep yourself healthy, whether that's a psychological reason or a physical reason. This could be used as a way of saying, actually, no, we have to be able to eat in order to observe the laws better, because we want to live by them rather than die by them. So moving on from that, actually leads quite nicely into the next one, which is an account of Rabbi Israel Salanter from the 19th century. Rabbi Israel Salanter was someone who was very concerned with halakha, very concerned with following Jewish law, but he also was very good at being very creative about interpreting it and being able to reinterpret it for the circumstances he was in, which I think in some ways is quite a nice progressive value, being able to say we value tradition, but we need to be able to do it differently if times call for it. And there's an account of what he did during a cholera outbreak in his city on Yom Kippur. So it was considered to be a very bad idea to fast during a cholera epidemic because it made you weaker, and therefore if you contracted the disease, then you were more likely to die from it. So this is an account of him, of what he did on Yom Kippur afternoon. And when it says afternoon, what I think it means is the afternoon before Yom Kippur. So before people started gathering in the synagogue, before sun came down on Kor Nidre. And this is an account from somebody, it's quite a few years afterwards. It's Yom Kippur in the afternoon. The rabbi stands on the platform in the center of the synagogue, tall and venerable. The people are waiting to hear what the rabbi will say, and one is afraid to draw one's breath, and the rabbi begins to speak. His weak voice grows stronger and higher every minute, and at last it is quite loud. He speaks of the sanctity of the Day of Atonement and of the Holy Torah, of repentance and of prayer, of the living and of the dead, and of the pestilence that has broken out and that destroys without pity, without rest, without a pause. For how long? For how much longer? And I hear him say, and when trouble comes to a man, he must look to his deeds, and not only to those which concern him and the Almighty, but to those which concern himself, to his body, to his flesh, to his own health. There are times when one must turn aside from the law, if by so doing a whole community may be saved. With the consent of the all-present and with the consent of this congregation, we give leave to eat and drink on the Day of Atonement. So it wasn't just there one person saying, I'm going to fast, I'm going to eat on Yom Kippur for my own good. It's saying to our whole community that the whole community is going to eat and drink today because it's necessary for everybody's health. And some versions of the story actually speak about him literally getting up and breaking bread and eating and saying the blessing on the bima on Yom Kippur. So it has that also that power that he was not just saying, oh, it's okay, you can eat, but do it secretly and privately somewhere else. He was showing leadership by actually showing people that they were able to, as he says, break the law in order to save people's lives.
So I guess the question is, where does this leave you for this Yom Kippur in the next 2 minutes? So I'll be completely honest with you. My opinion is that fasting is not the be-all and end-all of Yom Kippur. I believe that we fast in order that we are not taken away from shul and from spirituality and prayer by our bodily functions and by our needs. However, if you are a person like me that finds it very, very difficult to fast, then you become preoccupied with fasting. And therefore that in itself takes you away from prayer and spirituality. So I believe that fasting should not be the thing that draws you into this Yom Kippur, especially when you are at home and very close to your fridge. The thing that I would like you to do if you decide this year not to fast is to frame it in ritual, because ritual allows you to break the fast in a meaningful fashion, in a way that is purposeful and framed. So we've passed on a prayer for those not fasting on Yom Kippur, something to say, in which it says, may my eating be as a fast to you. May it be dedicated to you, to teshuvah, to the renewal and restoration of my relationship to you, to others and myself. And I would suggest, if you are deciding not to fast, that you begin your non-fast by saying a prayer. But there's also a ritual that we've provided you with. It's a ritual written by Rabbi Debbie Young Summers. It's available on Ritual Well. And it takes the idea of bringing kavanah, intention, to the act of eating on Yom Kippur. So framing it in a positive, constructive way, whilst recognizing the challenges that you're facing on that day. And there is an idea in Jewish tradition that that you can set aside a plate of food, an Erev Tavshilin, which has the holy purpose of being set aside, that you specifically set that food aside. And therefore, that food is there to be eaten, and it is a holy act to eat it. And there are some suggestions of food that you can set aside in this way. So a date, because a date is the symbol of righteousness. So you say whilst you eat the date, I acknowledge that the right path for me is not always the easiest one, and seek to nourish myself in body and soul. Hummus, food of the earth, and mayim, water, so that you can be mayim chayim and living water. And finally, challah, because challah is an offering to God. You're meant to set aside some of your challah when you bake it as an offering to God. So you're setting aside a purposeful plate of food, and it is from that you eat. So instead of it being a distraction that you get up, every 20 minutes, or what can I go and get from the kitchen, that there is a plate set aside for you to eat from. And that is your holy food for Yom Kippur. And it takes that distraction element out of it. And I just think that by blessing that food and by sanctifying it, and by allowing yourselves to break the fast, you are hopefully going to be less distracted from sitting in front of Zoom and from focusing on prayers and spirituality. And instead, you are going to be able to find holiness in that day. So I hope that gives you something to think about. I know Elliot has one last thing that he was going to read for you, just to send you off with a thought. And then we'll see if anyone has any comments, bearing in mind we have 3 minutes to get downstairs or to our next room to hear from the Prime Minister. So Elliot.
So this is a line from Rabbi Leo Beck, which actually is included in the ritual that Hannah just drew our attention to by Rabbi Debbie Young-Summers. And it really speaks this idea that we need to do what is right for ourselves, and our bodies often are the one, we're the best interpreters of what our body needs. And it really speaks to that idea. Rabbi Leo Beck says, every person is a question which God addresses to humanity, and every person from their place, with their own special talents and possibilities, must answer for their own sake.
So whether you choose to fast or not to fast this year, we hope that your Yom Kippur is meaningful. If anyone has any questions, feel free to hang around and ask them, but we also don't want to keep you if you want to rush off. So Shana Tova and Gamar Chatima Tova, and we look forward to seeing you over Zoom through the next few days.
Shana Tova.
Thanks very much. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.